Yo, what is going on, guys? Welcome back to another video. So now we're only a month away from the start of the 2024-2025 season. So today I wanted to go through some of the teams that have the most pressure on them to win the Stanley Cup, not just to make the playoffs, not just to win a round, to win the goddamn Stanley Cup. What is this going to be based on? How old is their core? Is their core a bunch of guys in their early to mid 30s? You're going to have a lot of pressure considering those guys can fall off out of nowhere. What's the contract status of your core, given the fact, or you have some like cheap deals that are about to come up either this year or next year that you're going to have to pay massive raises for and then have less cap to spend on your team. Also, what is your draft pick situation? Did you already trade your 2025 first round picks? You got to go deep in the playoffs. You got to potentially win a Stanley Cup. So we're going to go through this right now. We're going to start with number one. You can probably imagine who number one is. And then we're going to work our way down all the way down to number 10. And then at the end, I'm going to give you some honorable mentions that just barely missed the list and why. Up first, it's clearly the Edmonton Oilers. When looking at it, the main points are clearly Leon Draisaitl's in his last year of an $8.5 million contract. We already know what his pay increase is going to be. It's going to be $5.5 million at $14 million. And Evan Bouchard's entering the final year of his $3.9 million per contract, probably the best defenseman value for next season. So those guys who need massive pay grades, pay raises, and as a result, you're not going to have as much money to spend on the team heading into next offseason. You're probably going to lose like a Jeff Skinner and some other pieces that are maybe expiring. You might have to trade some guys. And on top of the fact that they don't have their 2025 first round pick, they traded they traded with the Flyers to get the 32nd overall to get Sam O'Reilly. Also, their core is just like old in general. Their forward core, especially if Matt Savoy does not make the team, their youngest forward is projected to be Connor McDavid at 27 years old. Their average age of forwards is like 31, and even their defense core is not very young. So this team is aggressively all in. Yes, Draisaitl, Bouchard, and McDavid are not that young, but also core pieces. The second tier of core pieces, Matthias Ekholm, 34 years old, Hyman, 32, RNH, 31. They don't have a good prospect pool. They don't have a ton of picks. So the time is now this year after making the Stanley Cup final, after making Game 7. And I forgot to say, also another factor for this is whether you won the Stanley Cup or not. Florida Panthers aren't going to be on this list considering they won it last year, even though they should hopefully be a highly competitive team, a top 5 team. But for the Edmonton Oilers to come that close and have such a good offseason when looking at the guys that they brought in, you got to win the Stanley Cup or bust. Even if they lose in Game 7 of the Stanley Cup Finals this year, it's going to be a failure of a season because they didn't take that next step. Number 2, the New York Rangers. I don't think I'm biased by giving them all this pressure, so if they don't win the Stanley Cup, they're a failure. But when looking at it, they have a similar thing to the Edmonton Oilers. Not as good of players, but Igor Shesterkin is as good as player. But Igor Shesterkin last year of a $5.66 million per deal. He's actively said, there's reports coming out that he wants to be the highest paid goalie in the entire NHL, which if you're counting active would be $10 million of Bobrovsky. If you're talking about Carey Price, 10.5. But he's probably going to reset the market, and rightfully so, given the fact of what he's done the last 3 seasons in both the regular season and the postseason. And also, Alexis Lafreniere only has 1 year left at $2.325 million. He's going to get a raise. Even if it's a bridge deal, he's probably going to get $6 to $7 million. If it's a long-term deal, it's going to be like $8 to $9 million, especially if he takes another step this year. On top of Keandre Miller is also entering the final year of his deal. It's paying him, I think, like $3.6 million. So they got some deals coming up. On top of their forward core, just being pretty old outside of Lafreniere in terms of key pieces. Maybe if Hedl bounces back, he's going to be a key piece. But Panarin's 32, turns 33 October 30th of this year. Kreider's 33, Zibanejad's 31, and Trocheck is 31. So those guys are old. There's no guarantees. For all we know, one of them could fall off next season in the next 2 to 3 years. Just naturally, I know Panarin did just have a career year, but naturally, some of them will start to age pretty poorly. And they have some solid forward prospects like Gabe Perreault, Brennan Ottman. Obviously, Lafreniere's a young guy. But to assume that those guys are going to turn into legit stars that 4 is right now is definitely bold. They're going to be competitive for multiple years, but this is looking like potentially their best chance to win the Stanley Cup. Maybe last year was, but this is another prime opportunity until they have to really pay some guys. So I have the Rangers at number 2. At number 3, the Nashville Predators. I made a TikTok on it today, but they have the assets. I don't think that they're that good of a team right now. I think they're a playoff team, but I don't think they're an actual contender. But considering the fact that this team has 3 first-round picks, their own, the Lightnings, and the Vegas Golden Knights, they're top 10 protected, but I think we agree that the Lightning and Vegas Golden Knights, something would have to go horribly wrong for those teams to be bottom 10. But they have all these assets. They should be aggressive as hell, considering the fact that they got guys like Yossi is 34, Ryan O'Reilly's 33, and they brought in Stamkos who's 34, Brady Shea's 30, Jonathan Marchessault's 33. They are old as hell. They have like the oldest core in the entire NHL. So although, unlike the team in the 1 and the 2 spot, that's another factor for this that I should have mentioned, like how likely are you to win the Stanley Cup? They're maybe not as likely, but this team, they're probably only going to have 2 to 3 more years of actually contending. I think that they should be aggressive as hell the next 2 years and then eventually enter a rebuild in like 4 to 5 years, especially after trading Askarov. So the Nashville Predators, I think, have a metric shit ton of pressure, even if they maybe aren't a top 5 actual cup contender. Right now, given the age of their core, they got to be aggressive. Number 4, the Boston Bruins, 2023, they set the record. Last year, they're a highly competitive team as well with 109 points. And this summer, they made some big moves. Obviously, they traded Ullmark. That was naturally going to happen. They're going to sign Swayman. But in terms of win-now moves, they got a pair of 29-year-olds on pretty massive deals. When looking at Zadorov, 6 years at $5 million. Elias Lindholm, 7 years at 7.25. They need to get, in the David Pastrnak era, I count that as 2020 on, once he won that Rack Richard, they have not even made an Eastern Conference Finals. There is a lot of pressure on this Boston Bruins team. They haven't won a Stanley Cup since 2011, despite constantly being a highly competitive team, especially in the Eastern Conference. They need to go on a deep run. And a guy like Brad Marchand, yes, McAvoy, Pastrnak, Swayman, they're still pretty young. But a guy like Brad Marchand has been regressing recently, especially offensively. 80 points in 70 games in 2022, 67 points in 73 games in 2023, and this year 67 points in 82 games. So he's been one of the best. His contract is one of the best in like NHL history or salary cap history, $6.125 million. But he's entering the final year of his deal, and he has been regressing recently. So as a result, you got to go on this deep run. And when looking at Boston, although I think Matty Pontra and Mason Lohrei could be solid players down the line, they don't have like any truly proven U25 talent. So their core is now, they're only going to probably have like 4 to 5 more years of actual contention. So as a result, the Boston Bruins need to go on a deep run and potentially win the Stanley Cup. Number 5, the Toronto Maple Leafs. I don't think that they're actually like a cup contender. I'm not really that high on the Toronto Maple Leafs, but there's no doubt that there is a lot of pressure. My expectations for them are not that high, but there's always going to be a shit ton of pressure in in Toronto, and especially when you're entering the last year of Mitch Marner and John Tavares' deal, the first year of Matthews and Nylander, they're going to have to prove their worth. And they also went out and got some veterans like Chris Tanev, like Oliver Ekman-Larsson. And I understand that those guys, once they start to regress, are probably going to get thrown on LTIR, but they might only have like another 1 to 2 years of actual high-level play until you have to ship them off. So you got to maximize that value. I don't like their bottom 6, but their top 6 on top of, I think their defense score is actually pretty decent after those ads. I think their goalie tandem can be solid if they actually stay healthy. Joseph Woll, looking at you. So as a result, the Toronto Maple Leafs, they have a lot of pressure on them to win the Stanley Cup. Number 6, I got the Dallas Stars. They're a weird scenario. In terms of results the last 2 years, you would probably have them like number 1 or number 2, considering the fact they made the Western Conference Finals both of the last 2 years, made Game 6 of the Western Conference Finals, very good during the regular season. The only reason I don't have them like extremely high is because their core is so young. You look at Heiskanen and Ottinger, what are they, 25 years old, and Robertson as well. Wyatt Johnston emerged as a potential future superstar. Maverick Bourque I'm high on, Thomas Harley. So that's the only reason they're not like quite top 5, but there's still a lot of pressure. There's a lot of pressure. You make back-to-back Western Conference Finals. You got to take that next step. You got to make a Stanley Cup final. You got to win a goddamn Stanley Cup. And they actually finally have to go like all in at the deadline. The past 2 deadlines, they only traded their like 2nd and 3rd round picks for Max Domi and Chris Tanev. It is fully go time in Dallas when looking at it. And in terms of their salary structure, this is the last year of Wyatt Johnston's ELC. Yes, you're going to have Jamie Benn's contract be up. You're probably going to re-sign him around $5 to $6 million. But Wyatt Johnston's going to go from making $900K to, if you sign him long term, $8 to $9 million. So that's pretty big. On top of Jason Robertson, only has 2 years left at 7.75. So there's a lot of pressure on the Dallas Stars. But again, they have a very young team, so I'm not going to put them too high. The New Jersey Devils at number 7. Yes, they missed the playoffs entirely last year, but the pressure is still massive for a New Jersey Devils team. I think unless they make the Eastern Conference Finals, it's kind of a failure of a season for the Devils. So there's definitely some pressure on them to potentially go out and win a Stanley Cup. When looking at it this offseason, they went ultra aggressive. They got Brett Pesce. They got Brendan Dillon. They got Jacob Markstrom. Those guys are not young by any stretch. Those guys probably, Pesci's a little bit younger, but the other guys probably only have 2 to 3 more years of high-level play. Dougie Hamilton's getting up there in age, and especially coming off an injury. They're entering the last year of the Luke Hughes ELC. Simone Nemec only has 2 years left at an ELC. So this team needs to go deep, needs to potentially win a Stanley Cup. And they definitely have some high pressure, considering the fact that everybody's gassing them up. And rightfully so. If they can actually get some goaltending, they should be a premier Stanley Cup contender. I have them at number 7. Number 8, the Vancouver Canucks. Last year was the first time that they made the playoffs truly with this core, 2020 COVID, whatever. But when looking at it, the expectations are still very high, considering the fact they're not an old team by any stretch. Most of their core pieces are in the meat of their prime, so they're expected to be highly competitive. They're going to have another 4 to 5 years of being a very good team, in my opinion, but there's still a lot of pressure after winning the Pacific Division last year, after making the second round. Hopefully next season, I'd pick Edmonton over them right now, but they're on the same playing field, in my opinion. I liked some of the ads that they made this offseason. I like that they let Lindholm and Zadorov walk, and when looking at it, Miller is 31 years old. Thatcher Demko, I don't know how this guy's going to age, considering how injury prone he has been. He's hurt yet again, apparently. And they're entering the final year of Brock Besser's contract. He's not going to get some massive raise, but probably like around $2 million. So that also factors in. They are at number 8. The Carolina Hurricanes are at number 9. That might seem a little bit low, but I'm kind of low on the Carolina Hurricanes this year. I don't know. I feel like they don't have this ton of pressure. I feel like last year was the year that they kind of like went for it in terms of Jake Gensel, in terms of Evgeny Kuznetsov. So when looking at them, most of their pieces are kind of young outside of like Brett Burns and Freddie Anderson, but Chekhov's going to take over as a starter eventually. Slavin's like 29, 30 years old, but most of their key forwards are still pretty young. So I'm not like I don't think that this is like the year the Carolina Hurricanes have to go for it. I think that was definitely last year versus this. Again, they definitely need to make the playoffs. Like the expectation is at least the Eastern Conference Finals. I don't think they have like Stanley Cup contention, Stanley Cup winning kind of expectations or pressure. I think next year when Nikki Shin comes over, as well as some of their young guys take another step, that's going to be yet again ramping it back up. But next year I'm maybe not as high as others. And that number 10, I got the Vegas Golden Knights. Even though they won a Stanley Cup in 2023, after what they did at the 2024 deadline in terms of like putting all the chips in the middle, they don't have like any picks. They don't have their 2025 or 2026 first round. Their prospect pool is pretty slim outside of like Trevor Conley and Brendan Brisson, and their core is pretty old. Alex Pietrangelo is 34 years old, Mark Stone 32, Carlson 31, Hurdle 30, Theodore is 28, and Eichel and Hannafin are 27. So when looking at them, yeah, even though they won a Stanley Cup, they might only have like another 2-3 years left of actually being a contending team. Eventually this shit has to catch up to them. I know that they're running on like 7 years of being like a pretty high level team. Besides the year they missed the playoffs, they had apocalyptic injuries that year. At some point, this is going to catch up to them just naturally until they sign some like superstar out of free agency and are good forever. But I got them at number 10 as of right now. In terms of honorable mentions, the Winnipeg Jets, I'm just not very high on this year when looking at their team, on top of the fact that they kind of went for it last year. And they also have a very solid prospect pool that I think will prolong them and they'll be a competitive team for a while. The LA Kings, they're not winning shit in my opinion. Same logic for the Islanders and the Capitals. Yes, they are a little bit old, but I don't really think that they actually have like cup pressure because they're not a cup level team. And the Colorado Avalanche, they won it in 2022. I think that first we got to see how Landeskog looks to actually give them pressure. If he comes back like and looks like his old self, they're going to skyrocket up this list. But as of right now, I still think they're going to be a highly competitive team for the next 6 to 7 years, as long as Makar and McKinnon are both top 10 players and Rantanen as well. They are entering the last year of the Rantanen deal, so that might actually put them on this list. Like you could probably throw them up there, but I'm not quite ready to have them on the list yet. Let me know in the comments. What do you think about this list? Who would you move up? Who would you move down? Who would you put on? Who would you take off? I'll be seeing the next one, man.